All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Jason, Ryan. Thank you all for being here. The people coming into the meeting seems to have died down. It's 2 after, so we'll go ahead and get started. I hope you all enjoyed your break, small break from task force activities. So thanks for joining in on this workshop. As we talked about at our last official meeting, we'll have a few more scheduled in November, so keep an eye out on the calendar for at least 3 other sessions. Most of them will be virtual between now and Thanksgiving. So for those of you that have colleagues that are unable to be on today's workshop, we are recording it, so it'll be on the YouTube channel. If you or any of your colleagues need to go back and reference what we talked about today. So today, ERCOT is going to walk us through the details of the aggregation form, and we'll have a related discussion about that. So to use our time wisely, I'm just going to stop there, and I'll turn it over to Mark with ERCOT.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, for those of you who may not know who I am, Mark Patterson. I'm the manager of demand integration here at ERCOT. I'm one of the many members on the ERCOT team that's been working on this pilot project. And today I'm going to walk through the details of aggregation form for the group. Let me try to set a little bit of the boundaries here. I would like to try to get through each tab of this Excel spreadsheet and then open it up to questions if that works. If we do find out though that we get too bogged down, I may have to change that approach because it's critical that we get through the entire spreadsheet, all the tabs. So before I start, I guess I will at least ask, are there any questions at this point? All right. So there are currently 5 tabs that are part of the form. You know, 2 of the tabs are really, well, actually 3 of the tabs we're going to be asking for information from the QSCs and the DSPs for this form. This first tab is an instruction page that was added.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Hey, you may, if you can share your screen. Yep.
I just realized that. Okay, can you see the instructions tab?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So this first tab, the instructions tab, has been just recently added by input from the DSPs. I'm not going to really go through each line on this tab, but it's really just I guess the process that they've defined of what the QSC should do and who the QSC should send the form to once they've completed it on the DSP side. I think they're still waiting on, I guess, maybe the contact information for TNMP, so that'll ultimately get updated. ERCOT, once we get, it's kind of been our plan all along that once we get very close to final all the fields on this spreadsheet, that there's going to be a full instruction sheet that'll be added to describe each field and what the acceptable entry into that field would look like. So hopefully that'll help, but that is not available currently. So, and we're not going to be going through and trying to get into that level of detail today. But if you have questions, we can try to answer them if we get to a certain field. Hang on just one second. There we go. moving on to the what we call the identification tab. And let me also, I guess maybe it's also important that I explain, I see the DSPs. We probably need to come to an agreement on what we're going to ultimately call this thing. ERCOT's been calling it a details of aggregation form. I guess the acronym for that is DOA. Maybe the DSPs find that to be the appropriate title. So we'll come to an agreement, and it will be consistent once this thing gets rolled out in its final session. So there are a number of things that are on the identification tab. It's that basically it's just saying that since this is going to be submitted by the QSC to the DSPs and then ultimately to ERCOT, by submitting this this spreadsheet, they basically understand what they're affirming that to with the submission of the form itself. Well, other than those affirmations, it's really just used as a place for the QSC to tell us and the DSP who we should be contacting if there are questions that come up pertaining to the form itself. We also have come to we're going to try to standardize the naming convention for ADER. And since an ADR has to be one ADR per load zone, per DSP, and per QSC, we're going to go ahead and include that pieces of information in the resource name, and then what's called a unique resource name will be left up to the QSC to call it whatever it wants to. And let me also be very clear, each aggregation, each ADER is to be submitted on a separate spreadsheet. So if a QSC is going to be submitting multiple aggregations, they're going to need to be submitting completing multiple forms and submitting multiple forms to both the DSP and to ERCOT. We've also, in the creation of this form, we've tried to use a little bit of a color format here that means different things. Those items, and I'm going to just flip through just so you can see what the colors look like. For those items that are in this orangish color, whatever you may want to call that, these are cells that are going to be only completed by ERCOT, not the QSC and not the DSP. The cells that are shown in gray color, which is going to be a majority of the whole spreadsheet, that will be required to be completed by the QSC, and then those cells that are highlighted in green will be the responsibility of the appropriate DSP. So hopefully that'll at least somewhat simplify or remove confusion about who is to complete what portions of the form itself. This version here, there are some note tabs associated with some of these cells. I mean, we attempted early on maybe to do some of that. I've noticed some of them I think are already maybe even out of date with some versioning. So don't spend too much time, be concerned about what may be in the notes on the individual cells. Again, it's going to be much clearer once we add a complete tab that's going to show the instructions for each cell. So again, just don't get too worried or confused about what may be in the pull downs on the red notes. All right, that's the identification tab. Let's see, are there any questions at this point? All right. So I'm going to move on to probably the core of the spreadsheet itself. And again, I'm going to go pretty much tab by tab and try to get a little bit of add some clarity to what's expected. Again, on the far top left-hand corner of this, this is what we're calling both premise and device information. because what you'll see on the left-hand side of what we're going to call this yellow line, everything on the left-hand side is going to be premise level information associated with the ADER, the ADER. Then once you get to the right-hand side of the yellow column, this is going to start being device-specific information that ERCOT's going to need for this pilot project. So it's also important to note that there can be multiple controllable devices behind the premise. So let's say a certain premise is going to have both let's just say HVAC control and or let's say a battery back there. Each one of those devices, if they are going to be under control for the purpose of this resource, then each device will need to have a separate line on this form. So on the premise level information may be the same, but then once you get over to the right-hand side of this yellow is where then you're going to list your different devices, and then it's going to be device-specific information on the right-hand side of the yellow line. Was there a question there? Okay, so we've tried to pull down the forms. I think it's down to line 200. So if your aggregation is greater than 200 entries, and again, that could be more than 200, or that could be less than 200 premises if you have multiple devices per premise. But if it's more than 200, then you're just going to have to copy down these cells to cover everything that you're going to be included in your aggregation. However many devices associated with all the premises within your aggregation. So let's start then with going across the cells for the premise level. The first column. Yes, Ned, do you have a question?
Yeah, Mark, that what you just mentioned there about adding rows if needed. I was just curious, is there, from y'all's end, is there any impact on whether you just copy the format or if you insert cells from some of the formatted stuff? I know sometimes just copying and adding can bust formulas, whereas inserting will capture it. So I just wanted to confirm if that was a sensitivity.
I would assume it's just going to be a copy and paste for additional cells. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think you can just copy that last row and just take it down. It should be okay. There's really only one formula in the whole spreadsheet, I believe.
Okay.
There are some pull down menu things, but there's only one formula in the whole spreadsheet.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's start off with column A. This is a unique premise ID. So all this is just whatever the QSC wants to call this premise. It could be premise 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't matter. It'll be easy if we're having questions concerning a premise within the entire aggregation. If we're having to have conversations with the QSC or even the DSPs trying to have conversations, they can easily name not only what row it is, but what the premise name is. Then columns B, C, and D. This is the address. This is the physical address of each premise that's listed. So I think that's going to be pretty self-explanatory. Again, but these will be the physical addresses. When we get to columns E and F, there's probably been more discussion about these two columns than pretty much anything else in the spreadsheet. So let's talk about the premise start and stop date. What we are expecting is the premise start date should be always the first day of the month for which this spreadsheet is being provided for. And then the premise stop date should be the last day of a month. And when I say of a month, it doesn't have to be the last day of the same month that it was submitted. It could be some month into the future, but it needs to be the last day of the month. The purpose of that is, I mean, when ERCOT is going to be using this, I hope I didn't just, there we go. So when ERCOT is going to be pulling data to do studies or evaluations, we're going to be pulling this data for whatever is, if we're going to be pulling it, let's say this is, has the date is shown here, January 1st of 2023, and we're doing an analysis in January. We're going to be looking at whatever premise had a January 1st start date, and the end date is still a valid end date. We're going to be pulling meter data for all of those premises. A good way of always saying this, and I think Kenneth probably explained it to me best earlier today, has a QSC. If you have this premise in your aggregation on the first day of that month for your report, for your update, you should include that as a January 1st or the first day of the month for that report if it's in your aggregation. It doesn't matter if, let's say, if that premise is leaving somewhere in the middle of the month and maybe going either dropping out or moving to another QSC, another rep. We would still expect the start date to be the first day of that month. And then the stop date again would be, if it's leaving within that month, it'll be the last day of that month, even though it's not going to leave on the last day. If it leaves anytime within that month, we would expect you to show the last day of the month in column F. Okay,
Hey, Mark,
Michael,
it looks like yep.
Yeah, Michael, you got a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, thanks. So if you don't have a premise that's leaving, that you've got an identified time for leaving, should you leave this blank?
You could, I think it would, I'm not sure blank's going to hurt anything other than somebody's going to question if you accidentally left it blank. It may be good to probably to put a date just way out into the future, and you'll update it with future updates. But if it's just undetermined how long you're going to have it, I would put it some date out in the future.
Great, thank you.
Kenneth, do you have a different position on that?
No, I agree. I think that's what you should do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. And then the DSPs have asked that if there's something, so if this is going to be an update, not your initial submission, but if this is going to be one of your monthly updates and there's changes going on with that premise, they're asking for you to give, and this is a pull down that you could select from, a reason for what's going on with that premise. So it just kind of gives them a little bit more information, or they may only want to focus on new or changes that are going on with only the premises that are changing within that aggregation. So it helps them fine tune the work that they have to do. The next column H, if this is in a competitive choice area, we need you to provide the easy ID for the premise. If it happens to be in a noise service territory, then we're asking you to tell us what the noise service territory is. I thought this was going to be a pull down. Maybe we didn't enable it yet, Kenneth, because I thought we. Oh, that's just a load zone, not the. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think we left that
Yeah.
to freestyle. Just
Yeah, this
they
is
can freestyle
freestyle. All right, so we need to know the noise service territory, and then for a noise service territory, the noise is going to need to assign a unique meter ID to each premise, and then they're going to need to tell us what that unique meter ID is, so that when we go need to get meter data for that, we know which meter data to assign to that premise. And then column K will need you to tell us what the LSE that's associated with either that easy ID or the unique meter ID. Here's the one I was mistaken for. Here's the ERCOT load zone. And again, there could only be one single load zone per aggregation. This is a pull down, but for the entire aggregation, this will need to be the same load zone. And we column M is we're asking for who is the DSP that serves that premise. And again, the aggregation is supposed to be only one DSP per aggregation, so this will also be the same response for each premise. That'll be a part of that aggregation. The next couple of cells are going to be the responsibility of the DSP. So the QSC is going to submit this to the DSP, and the DSP will be reviewing it, and they'll have the responsibility either accepting or rejecting each premise within the easy ID. If the premise is being rejected, there are different reasons that's on a pull down here. And we're asking the DSP to explain the reason why that premise is being rejected. And then column P is who the transmission service provider is. And a lot of times what we found out working with other load services like ERS or even the load resources, the QSC doesn't necessarily know who the transmission service provider is, but the DSP should. So we're asking for the DSP to tell us who the transmission service provider is for this premise, because they're the ones that are really going to know, are going to have the information about how it's ultimately connected onto the system. Okay. I was just trying to see if that was a new question by Michael. I think it was the old question. All right. Column Q, we're asking, and again, keep in mind, we're still on the premise side of this spreadsheet. So we're asking, will the premise have any injection capability at the point of disconnect? So that's at the TDSP meter. And just a simple yes or no question. Again, if it's just a load of load control, then and that's all that's at that premise, then the answer to that would be no. But if you've got either PV or if you've got batteries that will have injection capability, we're asking for you to tell us, and that would be a yes for those different types. And then column R, where we're asking for the total controllable capability at the premise. And let me explain what we're talking about here. So it's if let's just say there's one control device, and let's just call it the HVAC control. Then if and that's just going to be demand response. So you would be telling us how much of the AC control can be controlled at that premise. But if you've got multiple devices, let's say you have 3K, 5 kW of HVAC control, and then maybe another 7 kW of batteries. Well, then your total controllable capability there would be 10 kW. So you're going to have to just, tell us what all you're planning on controlling and providing us a single value there for the entire premise. And then in addition to the total controllable, then in column S, if you do have injection capability, we want you to tell us what your maximum injection capability is at that premise. And column T is the telemetry contribution. This gets down to, are you planning on using premise level data? That's going to be how your telemetry is going to be for this for that premise, or is it going to be device level? Again, for the pilot project, we've agreed that an ADER can do both, but we're asking at each individual premise level, tell us if you're going to use premise or device, because that's going to tell ERCOT how we're going to try to do the validation for that piece of the overall ADER telemetry. Yeah, Michael, you got another question?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. On column S, the maximum injection capability, that would be if basically it's the maximum export or the maximum production of the resources, regardless of the load that's present, correct?
No, so this is again, it's important because that is at the premise. So that's if load is offsetting the actual injection, not the injection, maybe that's not the right word. Well, let me call it the injection at the terminals of a device, let's say a battery, but part of that's being offset. We want to know what's actually getting is hitting the TDSP meter.
Okay, so like if you've got a average load of a house, and you've got a solar panel there, would you take the output of the solar panel minus the
Yes.
average load, and that would be the maximum injection
Yes.
capability?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So are we clear about the telemetry contribution? Again, this can be at each premise. This could be either premise level telemetry or device level telemetry.
Hey, Mark, this is Ned. I had one question on that. Are y'all expecting that telemetry validation to be the same for all devices at a premise?
So here's what our thought is. We're going to be adding up the contribution from either device or premise, that part of it, and we're going to do a different process depending on if it's premise or device, and then adding those up together to try to validate then the actual telemetry for the entire ADER. That's our hope. It's going to be, again, I think we've said this quite a few times, feel pretty confident about that approach. If it's premise level telemetry, if the whole thing is premise, what we're by adding the two components together, we're hoping we're going to see it's a magnitude change from whatever the telemetry change that the QSC's telemetry into ERCOT. We're going to be expecting a magnitude change based on both the export channel and the import channel in aggregate for all the premises in the aggregation. Hopefully I said that and it made sense.
I think so. And reading Sai's comment in the chat, I think taken together, what you're saying is you'll be looking at the premise level detail in total, and so when you add it all up, the puts and takes ought to line up. So I guess that to answer my question was really if you have multiple devices, at a premise, do you have to have the same telemetry contribution selected for each premise? And what I'm hearing is no, because they'll go through separate processes and y'all will be looking at the premise level data in aggregate to try to validate the ADER telemetry signal. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're saying, can multiple devices at a premise have different contributions? And I guess, yes, it can. Because I can see how y'all are, I mean, how the QSC may want to do that. So hopefully we'll be able to make that work.
Well, Mark, just to follow up on that. So let's say I've got an air conditioner and I've got a battery. The battery is able to have individual device telemetry, but the air conditioner is not. Should we then indicate that this is a premise level telemetry, even though one device could have provided device level?
No, I think we
Does that
ought
make
to, I
sense?
think we're asking enough questions that we ought to be able to do the math to be able to figure that out, Michael.
Okay.
Well, first of all, shouldn't that be 2 rows on the spreadsheet, Mark?
Well, it will be. Yes, it will be.
Yeah.
That's what I'm,
Yeah.
so,
So
well, I think we're gonna have enough individual information to be able
Yeah.
to determine the contribution, how much we should throw into the premise level contribution and how much we should throw in the device level contribution before we do our evaluations, and then add them back together.
Yeah, so I think our answer today is that you would show 2 rows on the spreadsheet for that premise. Your air conditioner you would show as premise level, and your battery you would show as device level. And if I'm hearing Mark correctly, we think we can handle that.
And I mean, that's what we'll be evaluating, right? I mean, we've talked about
Right.
the how good we can generally evaluate what's going on. So
Yeah.
And again, the whole point, I just want to make sure is clear is we're really, because of the mix of both premise and device, we're going to be interested in seeing a magnitude change in the telemetry consistent with what we're going to be seeing in the magnitude change between with both the export and import channels on the TDSB meter. Okay.
And one quick question. Will we have, so, so on 2 rows, we would have like the air conditioner on 1 row at that premise, and then we'd have the same premise information, but then on the 2nd row, we'd have the battery.
Well, the battery will still have the same premise level information, but then once
Yeah.
you start getting to the right-hand side of this, of column W, then you're gonna have very specific information pertaining to that battery. That's, okay?
Okay, I think I got you. What I guess what I was getting confused about was if everything up to column V is premise level, so all of that'll be the same, just, for the devices that are to the right on X and above, then should you just have one number that goes into column T for telemetry? And that's where I was getting confused, that it would
Yeah.
seem like you'd have
And
one that would be for device level, and then you'd have a different one for premise level. That's why I was
yeah,
getting
yeah, now
confused.
that I said that, this column T, I guess, will be the only information to the left of column W that may be different because it's going to be specific to the device.
Yeah, and it's not a number, it's just you're saying it's premise level or device level.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Maybe
for the
Kenneth, I mean, now that we said that, so it doesn't get too confusing, I'm not sure why we don't just move T over to the right-hand side of W. That may
I
make
think
more
that would,
sense.
yeah, that would actually make more sense. Because then you
that
could
sounds
have,
good. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. First time we've really talked through that, Michael, so thank you all. Seems like, Jayden what question you have?
Oh, I just know that a lot of these meters have built-in Zigbee capabilities for some of these sites that would otherwise use, some premise level, some device level. It seems like being able to use the meter in that way would be simpler in this aspect. Understanding there are maybe some other challenges with enabling that from the distribution utility side.
So the Zigbee is on the utility, that Zigbee capability is on the utility side?
Yeah, I think a lot of the utility, the meters are actually Zigbee capable. I just don't know, what it would
What's a
take to enable
Zigbee?
that capability. A Zigbee is like a kind of a radio, basically, that would enable more real-time communication with the meter.
Okay, maybe we all have a
That's
separate
probably, we can put a pin
conversation.
in that. That's a separate conversation. It sounds like this is a
Yeah.
separate conversation for a separate day. So let's put a pin in it.
Because that has all kinds of
Yeah, it will.
complexities well, okay. All right. So let's move to then column U and V. This is to be completed by the DSP. They're to provide the station code that on the distribution side that that premise is connected to, and then the sim load name, which is the transformer name. That's on the sim model for ERCOT. So this is going to be used by ERCOT for our modeling purposes. All right. Now we're going to move to the right-hand side. So this is now going to be the device level information we're going to need. First thing will be, and again, if you've got multiple controllable devices, there's going to be multiple rows for each premise. So first thing would be telling us what is the controllable device. We've tried to add a full list of options here, and if you look over to the far right-hand side, these are kind of the options that we've created on this. If there are other options that you see that are needed, please let us know. I mean, it's easy to expand this list.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
Yep, this is Paul. Hey, just a point of clarification here. If you've got multiple devices at the same premise, you submit a row for each device on this tab. I get that. Do you populate all of the cells to the left of the yellow column every time, or do you just do it the first time and then leave all those blank and just add data for the different devices?
I think we would prefer you go, even though it's going to be repetitive. I think we'd prefer you add it. Go ahead and fill in each cell. Again, gives us more confidence that it wasn't just something that was left off. So,
all right, just wanted to clarify. Thanks.
Maybe in further iterations we'll think differently, but that's our expectation right now. So now you've told us what your controllable devices are in column X, column Y. We want you. This is now, it's kind of similar to what we did at the entire premise level, but now we're talking about at the device. We want to know what the total controllable capability is of the device in column Y. And then we want to know the maximum withdrawal capability of the device if it's demand response. So that's going to be the withdrawal capability of that device. Column AA now is if the device can inject energy. We want you to tell us what the injection capability is. So again, just kind of being consistent with what we were asking at the premise level. Here are two new items here, though. If it is a battery, we want to know what the minimum rated operating state of charge will be for that battery, or the maximum operating state of charge will be for that battery. So you've told us what the entire capability is. Now tell us how you plan to operate that battery between what ranges. Okay?
Can Sorry, can I ask a quick clarifying question? This is Carmen from Recurve.
Yes, ma'am.
So if you are using the premise level settlement, would you still need to fill out this list of device level capabilities, or you would, even if you're using mixed combinations of devices, you could, if you're planning to settle at the premise level, you wouldn't have to itemize every device, correct?
Well, you're using a term settle because we're not settling. This is not information that's being used to settle.
Okay,
This is information so that we can understand what ultimately what the capability is of the devices, and then ultimately at the entire ADER, which is going to be the next tab we're going to use. So it's participation levels is really what a lot of this information is going to be used for, and it's going to help us with our validation. If the additional information will help with our telemetry validation.
okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Nothing's used here. And Kenneth, I think I'm going to say this. There's nothing in the spreadsheet that's basically used for any settlement calculations.
Can I
Yeah, I
ask a
would-
question on column Y? Oh, sorry, I might have interrupted someone.
No, go ahead.
For column Y, does that control the kind of 100 kilowatt minimum threshold to be an ADER? If that makes sense.
What's a tenth of a kW?
Oh, well, just when you add that all up, all the different devices, is this the column we look to? Just because there's a minimum 100 kW threshold?
No, actually, because no, that's a good question, though. But there's not any expectation that the addition of the sum of everything that's in column Y is your capability of the ADER, because you may have because it doesn't take into consideration that you may have you want to, well, your control system may not want to move the entire population all at one time. It gives you added flexibility. So I would suspect column Y would add up to be greater or potentially even much greater than what you're actually going to want to try to qualify and participate in during the pilot project.
Okay. Do one of these columns point to what would be kind of the qualifying minimum threshold?
That's going to be in the next tab. That's why we have
Okay.
an ADR summary tab. We'll get to that in just a second. Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay. So just finishing up then this tab before we move to the summary tab. These columns AD through AH. These are and I'm going to struggle with this. Apparently, there are different communication standards associated with some of this technology, and this is trying to understand if those communication standards apply to each premise, and even the device within each device within the premise.
That's perfect, Mark. And there may be more than one protocol that a device is capable of. So you just identify all of those, and if they're not available, then you don't. You just put no.
Okay. All right. So before I move off of this tab, are there any other questions? All right, so now let's move on to ultimately the what's going to dictate what your participation levels are going to be. And this is not, we are not feeding, let me make it clear, the individual premise or device level information on the previous tab is not being summed up anywhere here, because again, from what I was just saying, is the QSC may use a different algorithm or however they want to control their entire population. This is to communicate to ERCOT how much you plan to qualify to provide, and then with the added information that's required from ERCOT. So again, just so we all are consistent, you know, on the previous tab at the very beginning, you would need to tell us what this ADR common name will be. So that should be exactly what's going to show up in column A. Column B and C is going to be populated by ERCOT based on the information that the DSP provided on the previous tabs. So we will come up with a dispatch asset code for the entire ADER, and then we will also assign this offset value. So let me quickly restate what this offset value is. I'm sure most of the people on this call, though, are probably aware. Since we're trying to use the ADR modeling concept, which was a demand response only concept, but to make it work for this pilot, any injection capability of the entire aggregation is going to look to ERCOT by the use of an offset value to look like demand response. So if this ADR looks like it's going to have a total export capability of I'm just going to throw out a number, 1 megawatt. ERCOT's going to assign an offset value at least equal to, or probably it will be greater than, the entire export capability that the QSC is going to need to use in the telemetry and COP data for that resource. So again, this is going to be assigned by ERCOT based on the information that was provided in the premise and device level tabs. Column D and column E, this is going to be the QSC will tell us what their maximum withdrawal capability of their ADER is, and then E is going to be the maximum injection capability of the ADER. This is really, again, it's not going to be added. It's not going to be just a simple addition of everything on the previous tab. It's how you plan to operate your ADER at a maximum withdrawal capability or injection. The combination of those two fields is going to dictate what's going to show up in column I, which is the how much we would expect the ADER to be registered for to participate in the pilot project. So this will be the total. That's why it's the addition of the two. If you have a total of, this one just says 4 megawatts of withdrawal capability, and then an additional 3 megawatts of injection, that's a total operating capability or dispatchable capability of 7 megawatts for that ADER. Okay. I think column F and G is kind of consistent with what we showed on the device level on the previous tab. We need to know what and then now this is again at the entire aggregate level, what your operating range is of your batteries. If you have a battery, if your ADER doesn't have any batteries, then these would be 0 for both of these fields. Column H, we want to know if your ADER is PFR capable or not. For the pilot project, there's not or at least for phase 1 of the pilot project, there's not a requirement that it has to be PFR capable, but if it is, we want you to tell us that. And then just finishing up, I've kind of already explained what I is. This will set your registered capacity for the entire aggregation. Column J, though, you will need to tell us how much of that entire amount, though, you want to get qualified to provide for non-spend. And again, this will be dictated to some extent by the QSC participation levels that are noted in the governing document. And finally, here's going to be just ultimately the station code, the modeling information for your ADER, which will be provided by ERCOT based on the information the DSP and TSP supplies.
Hey, Mark, it's Paul again.
Sure.
Back on the question of the ERCOT assigned offset value, you know, is it, let me ask, is it ERCOT's intent to set that value at a level that will always allow the queasy to achieve its maximum potential injection and withdrawal capability? In other words, you know, establish it with a pretty wide guardrail there.
That's our intent, Paul.
Okay, I thought
Okay.
I said that earlier, so thanks. Just want to.
Yeah, I think we've determined. I think SI's determined that it doesn't hurt anything in our systems if we're pretty liberal. We just don't want to probably get way out of lines with how we assign that. But yeah, we want to add enough. We want to keep enough margin to where we don't. The QSC doesn't accidentally get over that threshold and violate the withdrawal requirement.
So if a queasy starts to get concerned that it's going to be a constraining factor, we communicate with ERCOT, and
Sure,
it can be adjusted during one of the monthly updates. Is that fair?
yeah. Anytime if they're concerned about that, that's a conversation we need to have. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Mike, was this a new question for you?
Yeah, but I think Ned was had a question.
Oh,
before.
Ned, I'm sorry.
Yeah, hey Mark. On column I think on a prior version or prior draft of this, that was in gray, and now I see it's in that orange ERCOT fills out color. So I was hoping you could clarify. Is that something where ERCOT will assign the registered capacity based on all of the details in the premise and device info tab? Or
No, I'm sorry, I cut you off. It's actually, it'll be a calculated value based on what the QSC told us in columns D and E on this tab.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only formula in the whole spreadsheet. Is that
I
cell?
found it.
That's it.
And
All right.
You passed
yeah,
the
so
test, Ned.
yeah, so we don't
found
want
the
you to
Easter
fill that
egg.
in yet.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michael.
Thanks. So on column S in the prior worksheet, when we were talking about net injection, that was supposed to be net of load on site. And then I'm trying to sync that up with I on this one where it looks like that's not net of load.
No, it's so no, so this should still be net of load because it's well, I mean, you're talking about the injection. This
Yeah.
is what we should see on the TDSP meter on the export channel of the TDSP meter, the maximum amount.
Okay, so that's net of load.
That is net of load.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, the other comment I would make is we have these limits we need to respect, for the load zones. And it's this cell I3 is what we're going to use as this is the capability of the ADER. That's what we'll be using to check those limits.
All right. Well, Kenneth, did I miss anything that you feel we need to share?
I'm seeing there's another question from David. Did you already hit that one?
Oh, no, I didn't. That's okay. Go ahead, David.
Yes. And I could just ask the question. I was just wondering if it would make sense for each queasy to fill out a single spreadsheet with each aggregator on it instead of having a separate aggregation form for every single ADER.
It's just a different way of setting up a spreadsheet. We opted to do one ADER per spreadsheet. That keeps the summary clean for us as well.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah. So Mark, no, I think you covered everything. The only here's the notes I got is back on your premise and device info tab. I think we all agreed that column T, telemetry contribution, which is a yes or no question, we should move that to the right of the yellow. So we will do that on the next version.
Yep.
And then does that sound okay? Yeah.
Yep.
And then the only other thing is I was going to make this bold statement, see what happens, is that we don't want anything left blank on this premise and device info tab. If, for each premise, if there's two devices and you have to put that premise stuff in there twice, we need you to put it in there twice. On the stop date, we said instead of leaving it blank, put a future date. And then on all the pull downs, we don't want you to leave a pull down blank. And I would go to the last 5 that we added here just recently with this version. For each of those communication standards, don't leave it blank, put no or put yes. And so I think my bottom line story is if we get it and we see a blank somewhere on this tab, we'll think you forgot something. I think that's correct.
So, and maybe since we have this large of a group, so what's the next steps with this form? And maybe yeah, what's the next steps? I do know that what I've said is once we firm up the fields, ERCOT's going to spend time then putting together a instructions tab. I guess in addition to what the DSPs had already provided, but an instructions tab for each cell, for each field. What's the timing of that, or what's the next steps?
So this is what I would say, Mark, and we can talk about it some more. Is so I wanted to go back to on your identification tab. We at the very top, we're trying to be really careful of always updating this version number. So we're calling this version 1.8. I think we're going to have a version 1.9 where we move that one column, and we may add some more notes. But one possibility is assuming we get approval at the November 3rd open meeting. That's when we're going to have the ERCOT-wide pilot page, and we will post, version 1.9 on that pilot page. That's one possibility. But I don't know if we want to wait till we get all these instructions and notes perfect. I think we want to make this one change and get version 1.9 out there so more people can look at it. So anyway, so I think at a minimum we'll have something posted, assuming there's approval on the November 3rd on the pilot page. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Any comments?
Hey, Mark and Stan Kenneth, it's Paul again. And by the way, I'm sorry, I can't get my chat function to work on Teams. And so if I'm stepping on other people who are in the queue, I apologize. My question is, how much of this, if any of this, gets posted publicly? I know we send it to ERCOT and the DSP monthly if there are any changes to the aggregation. Does it stay all the customer specific, I guess more appropriately, premise specific information in this thing? it stays confidential, right? It does not get posted publicly. Is that correct?
Well, that would be my understanding, but I think I would actually look to maybe legal or Kenneth or David. I would suspect any premise
Yeah.
level data would be confidential and not shared, but
Yeah, this is Catherine. I would say absolutely that would stay confidential. I think we had talked about providing an update on the pilot webpage at one point about how close we're getting to the caps. I'm not sure if we're planning on doing that still. I can't remember, but that's the only thing, if anything, that I can think of that we would be sharing is how close we're getting to the cap. I know we had talked in this, in our governing document, we talk about that we need to alert the task force when we're getting close to being full. Kenneth or Mark, do you remember if we were going to provide that on the pilot page?
Yeah, I think we do want to provide that on the pilot page, but it'll be
As
high
well.
level. And I
Yeah,
don't,
just,
we won't have any kind of premise details on that.
yeah, so that would be the only thing that from here that would be provided in any way publicly, is just how close we're getting to those overall caps.
Thank you, Catherine. So that, in other words, there are caps, by the way, on load zones and caps on
Those,
queasy. So if a queasy is nearing its cap, would the name of the queasy might be probably, but nothing other than that? Is that?
yeah, I was thinking even the higher level of the load zone, but off the top of my head, I think it would be okay to share as we're getting close to the queasy cap.
Yeah, and we can
I
even
would have
also
to
just
look.
say, we could also just say Queasy X. There's Queasy X out there who's getting close.
I think
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds,
that would be great. And queasy
Yeah.
itself would be a prize, I guess. But so this kind of plays into the, there's a little bit of overlap here with the form that the PUC has posted, the registration form for ADERs. And they've got it, that's posted to 53911, and anytime there's a change, it's an amendment to the ADER registration. It might, and maybe this is not a question you guys can answer, and that's fine. We can take it offline and ask commission staff. But they're wondering how much of that is contemplated being public, or is it also just something that is filed within the commission?
Paul, Mariah Benson with PUC staff. Every single time there would be a change to the ADER details, spreadsheet with ERCOT would not require an amendment with the commission. We're just asking for every month to file an updated spreadsheet with the commission, which can be filed confidentially. And if nothing has changed with what you're filing with ERCOT, there would be no need to file that with the commission either.
Thank you very much, Mariah. Yep. Thanks, you guys.
Okay, Mark, I had one other thing that was brought to my attention after my bold statement that we didn't want to see any blanks. It was pointed out that on that premise and device info tab, if you select the controllable device as a battery, we have a couple of if statements for column A, B, and AC. So if it's not a battery, I guess you can keep A, B, and AC blank for those cells. Yeah.
or NA, but maybe I agree.
Yeah, there we were looking for a number, so I would say we don't want an NA necessarily on a number, but yeah.
Okay. Good catch. Okay. If there's nothing else, Jason, I can turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and everybody for walking us through that. The form, if you don't have a copy of it that we were just walked through is on the team site under a new tab called Details of the Aggregation. If there are no other questions or comments on this subject matter, we can bring it to a close, but let me just pause for a minute to see if there are any other questions or comments.
Hey, Jason, this is Blake Gross with AEP. I snuck in a queue.
Hey, Blake.
Hey, it's just a general question on what the communication path is for the DSPs to know the final approved composition for each DOTA form. Meaning after we've reviewed it, we may have rejected some of them, and then maybe that list gets submitted to ERCOT, and maybe ERCOT rejects one or two. How does the DSP know for sure what's being accepted?
Catherine, I'm trying to remember in the governing document, does it talk about ERCOT once we approve it, sending it back to not only the QSC, but the DSP? I can't remember how that was, if we included that or not.
Yeah, let me pull that up again real quick. I do think we spoke to that. While I'm pulling that up, are there any other questions?
No, that's the only one for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and this is Christina Rollins from NRG. I just had a question about, we're seeing DSPs file statements, I guess, of intent to participate in the pilot project. Are you expecting any LSC that's interested in participating file a similar thing, or is that just for the DSPs to indicate interest?
Yeah, Christina, at the last official task force meeting, question came up of how potential aggregators might know what areas of the state are going to participate in the pilot, since DSPs don't have to participate. So I had asked DSPs that want to participate to indicate their interest by filing something in the project by end of October. That indication of interest is also not mandatory. But the point was to try to give an idea to market participants which utilities would be planning to participate. If we think that it would be helpful for other kinds of market participants to follow the same thing, I'm totally open to that. But that was the reason why the utilities are filing something.
That's actually really helpful. That I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss a deadline and seen anything.
Yep.
So, but that's helpful to know. Okay, thank you.
Got it. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, and Blake, I think it was your question I was looking into. So looking at the governing document, what it envisions is that the QSE sends the new updated details of aggregation form to the DSP, and then once the DSP has a list that they have consented to, then in one email, they would email that list to both the QSE and ERCOT. So when we're getting that list, the QSE can check that list against what they had originally sent the DSP, and there shouldn't be any surprises in between what the DSP is then sending ERCOT, because the DSP and the QSE, if there's any disagreements or any questions about any individual sites, there should have been discussion about those going on. But then we received that form that updated details of aggregation form at the same time as the QSE does.
Thank you, Catherine. That
Sure.
makes sense.
Okay.
So Catherine, this is Paul again, but that means you'll get it from the QSC originally, and then you'll later get it from the DSP. You'll get the same spreadsheet, and you'll be able to determine whether there were any modifications to the spreadsheet. Is that right?
I don't think so. I think that, and I remember there's a little bit of red lines here when we originally were working on it. When the QSC comes up with their original list of who all is going to be in the aggregation, and they've gotten the DSP to sign off on that, and there's been that back and forth, and there's the DSP consent through the DSP acknowledgement, and then there's also the QSC supplement to the SFA agreement. The DSP acknowledgement, the supplement to the SFA, and that initial details of aggregation form, that spreadsheet, that is sent to ERCOT. All in the governing document envisions it as being a package sent to ERCOT, and provides our email address that would be used. But when updates happen under the governing document, it's a little bit different because we are getting the update for the first time directly from the DSP. And I think when those red lines were made, I'm trying to remember all of the back and forth, but I think the part of the thought process was that there would be, you would think of fewer additions and subtractions as fewer net changes as to the initial form, but there would be possibly like less to work out between the DSP and the QSC, less total numbers of changes to be keeping track of as opposed to that initial form. So there'd just be that one, that email from the DSP directly to us and the QSC saying, here are the changes as we have approved them to what initially was in the details of aggregation form when the initial quote unquote application went through. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Catherine.
Sure, you're welcome.
Thank you, Catherine, for covering that for us. Any other questions before we call it a day? All right. Thank you all for participating. Like I said, we will post the recording of this workshop on our YouTube page in case you have any colleagues that wanted to hear this that weren't able to. And just a reminder for those of you that missed the announcements at the beginning that we do still have a couple of workshops we want to schedule in the next couple of weeks between now and Thanksgiving. So keep your eye out on the interchange for those. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.